guys, I saw this comment on yesterday's video. We have Just Daka says, man, we really need some video talking about affinity matchups and how they affect champs in all areas of the game, disadvantages, advantages, etc. We'd really like to see a video like that explaining everything. It's been a long time since we talked about affinity. I feel like it could benefit a lot of especially newer players out there. So today, I'm going to give it to you as quick as I possibly can. Everything you need to know about affinities and Raid Shadow Legends. Let's get to it. So there's 4 affinities in Raid Shadow Legends. There's Void, there's Magic, there's Force, and there's Spirit affinity. Each affinity, with the exception of Void, has a strong and a weak matchup, okay? Void is normal matchup, basically not strong nor weak against anybody in the game. Also, there are affinity brews or potions that you can use to level up your characters. If you use the correct affinity, so Rotting Mage is Spirit affinity, the little lightning bolt, well, you're gonna get 18,750 experience per brew. If you use the wrong affinity brew, you can still use it, but it's going to get you 12,500 experience per brew instead. So here are the affinity matchups. So Force affinity or Red affinity is going to be strong against Blue or Magic. Magic is going to be strong against Spirit. Spirit's going to be strong against Force. Conversely, Spirit is going to be weak against Magic. Magic is going to be weak against Force, and Force is going to be weak against Spirit.
What is going on?
With Void again in the middle, not weak or strong against anybody. Now, if you're a brand new player and you forget which affinity is strong against which other color affinity, no worries. You can tell by these handy dandy arrows. A green arrow obviously means that's a strong matchup because here we see Kale, who is Magic affinity against a Spirit affinity and Lord Shazar, for example. So that's going to be strong. Yellow is going to be neutral, and red is going to be weak. So if we go in through this wave and then we pass the baton to War Maiden here, check it out. We're going to have some weak matchups, the red arrows. So that's an easy way to tell if the matchup is going to be in your favor or not. Just look at the arrows over the enemy's heads. All right, so that's great, Ash, but what does it all mean? And this is where people go wrong. This is where people vastly underestimate how much affinity matters in this game, and it's really not rocket science, but it's important to take into consideration how much of a disadvantage. It's bad news for you guys. If you have a positive affinity matchup, it's a good thing, don't get me wrong. But if you have a negative affinity matchup, you're going to be punished even more so. So negative affinity really matters when it comes to how you're actually playing your account, when you're trying to use your debuffs, and what champions you're going to select for each given level of a boss or a dungeon in the game. So what does it all mean? Follow with me here because there's a few different layers of things that happens in these matchups. We're going to make it super easy and digestible for even you new players to understand here. So how does it work in battle? If the attacker, and I'm going to link this, you guys, in the show notes below too if you want to go back and revisit, right? If the attacker has an affinity advantage, okay? So again, let's pretend that we are a Spirit affinity champion facing off against a Force affinity champion. Or to make it even easier, because all the starting champions are Magic affinity, let's say we have Kale going against Lord Shazar. So again, a Magic going against a Spirit, which is a strong affinity matchup. What's happening? 30% chance to land a strong hit. So there's 4 different types of hits in Raid Shadow Legends. We'll talk about them in a moment. But a strong hit, it gives you an automatic extra 30% overall damage added on top. Again, I repeat, a strong hit, which you have a 30% chance of landing. If it lands, it gives you a 30% additional damage off of that skill, okay? You also get, this is separate from the 30%, you also get an extra 15% chance of landing a critical hit. This has to do with how you're building your champions in terms of your crit rate, whereas the strong hit has nothing to do with your crit rate, okay? That's separate. Crit rate, usually we're crit capping champions, we're building them to 100% crit rate. But if we had our Kale going against all Spirit affinity champions, he would only need, in that situation, in that scenario, he would only need an 85% chance of a crit rate because you have a built-in plus 15% chance of a critical hit landing, okay? Now, what if the attacker has an affinity disadvantage? And you can see there's more stuff here, again, making my point that it's even worse to have a disadvantage in this game. The damage is out the gate going to be reduced by 20%. Again, you'll notice, conversely, if we have a strong advantage, we have a 30% chance of getting extra damage. But on a weak affinity matchup, we have an overall damage reduction, no matter what, of 20% out the gate, okay? That's going to happen every time, no matter what your crit rate is, no matter what your crit damage is, no matter anything, okay? We get that penalty just built in. We also have a 35% chance of landing a weak hit. What does a weak hit do now? And it's 35, not 30. What the heck, man? Well, a weak hit decreases the damage by 30%, including all bosses and more stuff that we're going to talk about now. So now that's a decrease of an additional 30% damage, okay? 35% chance of having another 30% damage reduction, basically meaning if this hits, the weak hit, we're going to be getting a full 50% damage mitigation and reduction off of the affinity disadvantage here. That's pretty massive, right? But it gets even worse. The chance of landing a critical hit is also reduced by 15%. So now, if we have a 100% crit rate, as a matter of fact, if we have a 120% crit rate, we're still gonna get an 85% crit rate, okay? Doesn't matter, you can't overbuild your crit rate to mitigate this, unfortunately. So basically, you're gonna get a critical hit or not get a critical hit with your champion, right? And then after that, there's going to be a 15% shot that it's a miss. Basically, you're not landing the critical hit because of the affinity disadvantage. Does that make sense to you guys? So now we have an additional lower chance of even landing a critical hit. But it gets worse. We won't be able to place a debuff on his opponent. So on weak hits, we're not going to be landing any debuffs. We're not going to be able to land a debuff on a weak hit on most champions. I want to take a quick time out here because this is probably the biggest penalty out of all the penalties that you get from affinity disadvantages or, even in terms of the perks on advantages. But there's a few really special champions that we always talk about in this game, but hopefully now you'll really come to appreciate just how special these champions are. So it's champions like Contra the Cyclone. On her ability, on their passive ability, this champion can place debuffs on weak hits. A few champions have this ability, and it makes them basically like a void champion in some regard, okay? You can bring them into any match and know that their debuffs are going to be dependable even if there's negative affinities. It's an incredibly powerful ability. Vault of the Thorn is another one. The Provoke can land even on a weak hit. The Leech and the Provoke can land on weak hits. And again, there's no debuffs on the A3, but if they were, I bet they could land on weak hits. It's an extremely powerful affinity mitigating ability that these particular champions have. Important note about bad or weak affinity matchups, right? They're not always bad, kind of like a metaphor of life, right? You can find some silver lining in even a situation that is undesirable, and that is what you're seeing right now. We're seeing a weak affinity matchup act as a tank against Spider. This is Zephyr Sniper. You can use the same thing with Ultimate Death Knight. So we're facing a magic affinity, we have a Spirit affinity champion, and well, as long as the HP isn't too high, we can build them with a high resist. They'll resist the poisons of the Spiderlings. They'll be able to stay alive even though they are a weak matchup against the Spider. Same thing with the clan boss or the traditional clan boss Demon Lord stuns. If we have a weak affinity matchup, there's other factors than just the affinity, such as their HP and survivability, but oftentimes we can aggro the clan boss, or in this case, the Spiderlings, and we can circumvent either the poisons or the stun from the clan boss. So that is one way you can use weak affinities to work in your favor. Recap, guys, here. Feel free to take a screenshot of this chart if you want to. This is a nice, handy chart to have. Again, if you're just kind of learning the game, just picking up the game. On the advantages, we get an extra 15% crit rate. We get a 30% strong hit chance, and then the strong hit will do 30% extra damage. That's awesome. On the neutral, nothing happens. That includes void champions or or if a magic is attacking a magic champion. Nothing extra, no penalties, no advantages. On the disadvantages, though, this is where you have to be super careful, especially with live arena. And with any arena, you have to consider who you're bringing in terms of affinity if you want to be landing your debuffs, okay? Affinity disadvantages, minus 20% damage out the gate, minus 15% crit rate no matter what, plus 35% weak hit chance. Massive disadvantage. A weak hit does 30% extra or less, damage and cannot activate skill-based debuffs. So, there you have it, guys. Those are all the reasons that Affinity really, really matters in Raid Shadow Legends. I hope you found this helpful, especially if there's any new players that you know in your life or your clan. Please direct them. I respectfully ask you to direct them to this video because this information is truly so important. And I'm sure I'll be referencing this video for years to come, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, take care, guys.